One of my 5-star prediction books fell flat. As well as this little book haul. You'll achieve something, you'll buy a house, and then, oh no, you're not married. Or, oh, you'll get married, and then, oh, but you don't have children yet. Or, oh, you've got a child, you're married, you've got a house. Oh, but you haven't traveled the world yet. Like, you've never done enough. Hey everyone, it's Stephanie from Bath & Books and welcome back to this book nook. Today I am coming at you guys with episode 6 of a wrap up. I know I haven't done a wrap up in so long. Honestly, it's because my previous ones haven't got many views, so I didn't think you guys wanted to see them. But when I did a poll on the Instagram, you guys were wanting to see my quick little reviews. So here we are. As you will have noticed, I have not done a reading vlog. That's because that was honestly a whole failure team. I read nothing all week. I think this is part of the reason why I don't make these like monthly TBRs or monthly wrap-ups, because as soon as there's like a time pressure on things, I cave. I just cave, I burrow in, and I don't do anything productive. So that's why these always come at you at random times of the month. However, I did actually finish reading all those books that I spanned the wheel to read for the reading rush, which are the 8 books I will be reviewing today. But I also want to add a little something to this video series, which I am now going to make an effort to continue creating by having a look at my to be read pile number count, as well as if there's any new books I've added to my TBR. So to begin with, right now I have 310 books, not just on my physical TBR but also on my Goodreads TBR, and I'm really hoping that over the next couple of months we can get to sub 300. That'd be really good. But also, you guys know the drill, just heaps and heaps of good books keep coming up that I have to put on my list. So the way this is going to be formatted is I'm going to do my quick little reviews of the 8 books I have read first, and then I'm going to go into the books that I have recently added to my TBR, including this little mini haul over here. So I'll give you a little timestamp if you just want to pop ahead and see that mini haul and the books I've recently added to my TBR. Otherwise, keep on watching because I'm going to go into the books I have most recently read. Alright, starting with the one you've probably already seen, that is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, written by Grady Hendrix. I did do a really in-depth what the hype review on this book, and the consensus was it wasn't worth the hype. It was a solid 3-star book. My main critiques were that I found the pace really slow and I expected way more of the vampire stuff in here. So if you're interested though, I do recommend, if you enjoy quite suburban paranormal novels, or if you're actually someone who's a contemporary reader wanting to delve into paranormal books, or vice versa, paranormal reader who wants to delve more into contemporary books, because this definitely is a courtship of the two. If you're going into this wanting just heaps of vampire action, I don't think this is the place for you, which is personally what I was hoping and expecting for. Also though, massive trigger warnings for this. You have triggers for medicine misuse to the point of attempted suicide. You have rape of both young and elder women. You have domestic abuse. There's also elements in here which you may find disturbing if you're just against the gore and all of that. But I'll leave a link to my more in-depth review for this if you want to go check it out. I started reading the Witcher series. This is The Last Wish, which is book number 0.5 in the Witcher series, and honestly I really loved this one. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. If you are familiar with the Netflix TV series adaptation show, you'll be familiar with Geralt and the host of characters and the jumping backwards and forwards time frame of things, and it is mirrored quite wonderfully in here. I was very interested to find that even though it's 0.5, not book 1, the TV Netflix show takes a lot from this little book here. So this is actually a collection of short stories, is how it reads, from Geralt's perspective. None of them swap to the other characters you might be familiar with. We follow Geralt himself. So Geralt is the Witcher who essentially makes his living by killing monsters and the like from around the world in which he lives. You have the Bard who actually follows him along as a friend. We see Yennefer, who becomes his love interest and is just ultimately a really powerful witch. We see fairies. We see really interesting mythical and mystical characters. There's also a few little hints to like Snow White, for example, and Rapunzel, those like fairy tale sort of myths. I definitely recommend this one if you want to follow a man who has a moral compass and just kills and goes on massive adventures, but he doesn't do things needlessly. He's got quite a tight code of honour. Next up is Breakfast at Tiffanys. I gave this one 4 stars, so this is actually another anthology collection. Breakfast at Tiffanys itself is only 100 pages. Now we follow Holly, and Holly is a woman who honestly does whatever she wants to do. She doesn't care what anyone else thinks of her, she just does herself. So this is 1940s New York City. We follow her from the perspective of one of her residence kind of mates. I think he lives in the flat above her, and it's just really fast paced, really fun. You get completely swept away with the story, so definitely enjoyed this one. And if you want to pick up a classic and don't know where to start, I do recommend this because I thought the writing style was quite an easy one to understand. We then have Frankly in Love, which out of all of these is definitely my favourite read. I gave this one 4.5 stars. And this follows Frank. Frank is American Korean. He is the first one in his family to be born in America. And his parents both want him to date only a Korean woman. And then you also have Joy. Joy is in the same position as Frank in terms of being the first American Korean born in her family, and her parents have the same expectations. But essentially, both of them end up pretending to date each other because that's the only way they can see their actual boyfriends and girlfriends respectively. And it is just a really cute read. If you're wondering why I gave it 4.5, it's because about here, like 300-ish pages in, I felt like the story ended, and the last 100 pages were important to wrap things up and make sure there weren't any loose threads. But personally, I felt like it just extrapolated it a bit too much. I recommend this one if you are a fan of love triangles, because if you don't love love triangles, don't read this. It's a very heavy trope in here. If you liked books which talk about race and that idea of discovering who you are in a teenage setting, this one is for you. I then did a whole reread of Twilight in preparation for, as you can imagine, Midnight Sun, which is honestly so massive. I have done some research into the world of representation when it surrounds Twilight recently, and delved a little bit more into how Maya has represented the Quileute people, the Native American tribe that is represented in this book. And in this series, as you're probably familiar with, they are the werewolves, they are the bad people. It might not seem like that at first, but at the end, that is what happens. And then the idea that the vampires are always, their melanin seems to be reduced. They become those pale, sparkly figures, and how problematic that can be. So I'm definitely more aware of that. And when I go into Midnight Sun, I will be reading into that a little bit more and just making sure I'm aware. But in terms of the actual story itself, I did find myself enjoying it. It was quite a nostalgic throwback. I think that the movie does the book an injustice in terms of the relationships. I did talk about this in a reading vlog, so I'll link that up somewhere for you guys if you want to see like my in-reading reactions. But ultimately, I couldn't help myself but give it another 5 stars. That was before I learned about the representation, and I will definitely be more aware of that as I continue to reread and start the new Twilight books. I then read The Deep by Rivers Solomon, and I honestly had such high expectations for this that I think that's what damaged my own reading experience. Ultimately, I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Now, that's not bad. That's still a solid, good book reading. If you're into delving into the representation of history upon modern societies, especially of African American communities, if you're interested in how past events can weigh down on today's people, you might find this book really interesting. Be aware that it is set in a heavily fantastical world, being that our main characters are mermaids, essentially. And I found it fascinating, but it let me down in terms of I wanted more to happen. It's a brilliant book for conversations around race and representation and what it means to be a community and what it means to have your own freedom and individuality. that's really good, and I loved that side of things. However, that is very strongly the focus from a character-driven book. And personally, just my style of reading, I wanted something a little bit more plot-driven. Definitely there was plot moments in here that drew me in and I got quite excited, and then it kind of tapered off a bit. I don't think this was helped by the fact that it was like 160, I don't have it on me, 160 pages. So it is like more of a novella length, which although meant that it didn't get dragged on, which I appreciate, I wonder if it was a more traditional novel length, if things could have been explored and expanded a little bit more. But overall, not a bad book. I would still recommend it if you're interested in those things I've already mentioned. Gideon the Ninth. One of my 5-star prediction books fell flat for me. I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars. Pro points of this book: you have lesbian representation in a way where they don't need to be romantically involved with a fellow woman. They can just be lesbian without being in a romantic relationship, which I really appreciated. The world building was absolutely fantastic. I loved how I could see everything and picture things in my mind. I also thought the characters were pretty cool, but again, like with the plot fell for me. And I just was really struggling to get into it at points. I found some of the events, the like mini acts within the book, went on too long, or they went on for a too short of amount of time. It was almost like the planning stages of the book or the main climaxes of the book weren't fully developed or delved into, and it made it for such a anticlimactic read. Like for me, things were happening. Wow, 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 wow. Oh, that's the outcome? Ah, okay. That was just my like in-book reading. If you like necromancer stuff, if you like dark fantasy stuff, if you like challenges, there's a really heavy game element to this, this is for you. This was honestly a really unique perspective. It was just done in a solid way, not an extraordinary way. Then we had 1984, and I left this... ew. I left this till last because honestly guys, I got about 5 pages in and I didn't keep going. I don't want to say couldn't, because I could have, but I just wasn't in the mood. And when I asked you guys about it on Instagram, you all were mentioning how you really did have to be in the mood for it, and because it takes a wee while to get into it. So it is staying up here on my shelf. I'm just waiting for a chance where I'm more in the mood for it and to give it a proper shot that it deserves. Everybody who's finished it has loved it, so expectations. Okay, now we're at the section of the video where I'm going to talk about the most recent adds to my TBR, as well as this little book haul. So let's get into it. First up here I have Me and Elle and the Dying Girl. This is written by Jess Andrews and is a young adult contemporary, and this follows Greg. So Greg is going to high school and his plan is to play on the peripheries and ultimately just stay out of sight. Be a chameleon, don't get in anyone's bad books, but also just don't get in anyone's good books, just blend. But this all goes wrong 8 hours later when his mum forces him to become friends with the girl who has cancer, and it sounds like everything gets like flipped upside down from him then on in. We then have Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. This one I honestly just picked up because it was on sale, and I loved Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, for the first classic I've ever read where I've genuinely enjoyed it, like without pretending to for a paper or essay I had to write at uni. So I picked up Mansfield Park, and honestly I don't know much about this one, except essentially it sounds like you have the main character called Fanny, and Fanny Price, and essentially she's in a situation where she sees people pretending to be good but their morals are really wrong, and she kind of is traversing this world of what makes someone good in her books, and ultimately it sounds like a social disaster leads her to a conclusion. So it sounds like just one of Austen's witty, slightly humorous contemporary novels with the commentary on society, which is probably still relevant today, to be honest. Next up we have The Rivers of London. This is by Ben Aronovich, and I honestly picked this up to begin with because it reminded me heaps of the V.E. Schwab London trilogy book covers, which I read the first book of, never finished the series. But anyway, we follow Peter, who was a constable, and what happens is he finds somebody and talks to them, but they were already dead. And this just leads him on a journey. And honestly, that's all the blurb tells me. A fantastical London, which is one of my favourite settings. And then lastly, from the whole side of things, we have Dream Strider. This is written by Lindsay Smith, and again, one I was drawn to because of the really pretty cover. So this follows Olivia, and she's able to go into dreams and like take the skin of the person of like the dream that she's in. So if I'm dreaming, she came into my mind, she would like take my skin. Do you get me? Do you get me? And of course, as you can imagine, this makes her an invaluable spy. So that's like her profession until one day she discovers like nightmares. And it sounds like nightmares is the symbol. Sorry, just like a bird doing wheelies, okay. And she, think Bethany, where was your train? It's disappearing, Snapped back. The nightmare is like the symbol for the evil in this book, the antagonist, and she just has to defeat it. And along the way, she realizes the life and love of her dreams. Honestly, it just intrigued me. It sounded like a kind of fantasy spy story, which I didn't know I needed. And the last like fictional story that I've added to my TBR is Loveless by Alice Oseman. Now, I read her book called Radio Silence and absolutely adored it. It was so good. I highly recommend you go read that. The LGBT plus representation in there is phenomenal. And it sounds like this is another phenomenal book which follows around our main character, who is asexual / aromantic. Now, she goes to high school, what's her name? Georgia. She goes to high school, she's fanfic obsessed, classic kind of Oseman character from the sounds of things. Then again, I've only read one book, so don't take my word for it. And she's like, why am I not falling in love? So she kind of concocts a plan to fall in love, but ultimately this wreaks havoc in her actual life. And along that journey, she actually realises that she is asexual and aromantic. She didn't know that at the beginning of her journey. And it just follows her as she's dealing with self-discovery and wondering if maybe she was looking for the wrong person the entire time. And then we have 3 non-fiction books. The one you hear my snack bag. So the next 3 I have on my list are actually non-fiction, which is something I want to start delving into. You're thinking, Bethany, you've only got 2 there. Well, the first one is technically on hold. It's Broke Millennial by Erin Lowry, and you'll see that there's a theme with all of these. I'm trying to sort myself out. I am 23 and finding myself being pressured to be what society deems an adult, and also I think adulthood is an evil word, and we shouldn't be boxed into essentially losing all of our curiosity and explorative sense of selves. I do need to start looking after my money a little bit better. Not buying all these books, but buying all the books because that is my money, who cares? See, it's that mindset. But anyway, I saw this one recommended on TikTok, not gonna lie. Actually, I found all of these recommended on TikTok. I'll see if I can screen record the person's TikTok and insert it somewhere. Essentially, I wanted to get that one because it's to do with finance. I have one here that's called The Defining Decade, the 20s by Meg J. I am a little bit scared of this one because the blurb talks about making the most of the years we cannot afford to miss, which low-key is kind of stressing me out to begin with, because I feel like it puts a little bit of pressure to get your life together in your 20s, and realistically, I don't think that's ever going to happen. Because we're never going to be good enough. At least that's how I feel. Like, you'll achieve something, you'll buy a house, and then, oh no, you're not married. Or you'll get married, and then, oh, but you don't have children yet. Or, oh, you've got a child, you're married, you've got a house. Oh, but you haven't travelled the world yet. Like, you've never done enough. And this is, we'll take it one page at a time, but as you can tell, this is something that has been plaguing me for a wee while. And then lastly, the one I'm potentially most excited for is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey. Apparently, lots of people have read this. Probably someone who is watching this has read this. And essentially it goes through 7 habits of highly effective people. Kind of self-explanatory, Bethany. And I'm just going to take it a few pages at a time as well. So, that's my recent wrap-ups. those are some books I've added to my TBR and my physical haul. Those ones were library books I just showed you, if you couldn't tell. And the next video you'll see from me is my next Real Chooses my TBR. Okay, cool. Cool. I've been watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Enjoy all the places you go in your own reading adventures, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.